want to start with the emerging threat of the bird flu. It's certainly emerging. How big a threat is it?
Well, since we talked 2 weeks ago, they've identified another strain of this. It's the H5N9 strain. The one have been talking about is H5N1. And so now this is a new strain. And this is, as I suggested you 2 weeks ago, every time this virus gets a chance to replicate, it's going to reassort its genome to adapt to the situation. And this particular strain is of concern. And you look at the largest, one of the largest egg farms in the country in Indiana right now. They've had to kill 13 million chickens just to protect against this, even with all their biosecurity protocols in place. And so, you're wondering why the price of eggs keeps going up. I mean, that's the main thing that has to be tackled. And so, as you and I discussed offline, I was a little hopeful that, President Trump actually maintained the Office of Pandemic Preparedness and actually wants to appoint a veterinarian to that job. And so I think that's really prescient. I mean, that's what we need right now is honestly a veterinarian with global health experience.
Did you see that he is doing that? I mean, he is going to make that appointment.
Yeah, I
I'd
mean, we
saw I'd
saw
seen
that.
that it was. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, we saw that there was that news announcement on CBS. I'm not sure with this office if it has to go through actual approval from Congress, like the health secretary or like the CDC director or FDA. But as far as we know, I didn't hear differently. So hopefully, yes.
Uh, I wanted to get to. I don't know. Thank you, William, for that super sticker. I wanted to get to some other stuff besides bird flu, but before I do, you mentioned the mutation and the way that these
Mhm.
viruses change, and we all feel as though we've gotten a sort of an ongoing class in that, the way we've seen
Yeah.
COVID change, and when we see the seasonal flu change as well, right? Those are mutations of an existing flu. Uh,
Mhm.
is there any way to ever get out in front of this stuff? Is that what they're talking about with gain of function and all of that? The controversy associated with trying to manipulate these viruses in a lab. Give us some perspective on how you get in front of a mutation.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I think, when you look at COVID, for example, and we were tracking variant to variant, and, we would plan to roll out a particular vaccine to cover what we thought were going to be the more prevalent strains. And then 3 months later, it had already changed by the time we rolled out the vaccine. And we saw more quickly, that reassortment of the genome with COVID. And it was so difficult to keep up, even with the mRNA vaccine platform that makes it just so difficult. I mean, it makes it so easy to update the vaccines. And so, you know, it depends. I mean, I think COVID replicates and changes very quickly. The flu virus changes every season. But then if you look at something like measles, where you get two shots when you're 12 to 15 months and then another shot when you're 4 to 6, and that's 99% for 99% of adults, that's lifetime immunity. So,
Yeah,
um,
that really is extraordinary. It puts it into a kind
mhm,
of framework that I can get my head around, which is that,
right.
I mean, we have to be reminded the vaccines aren't all the same, the viruses aren't all the same, the pathogens aren't all the same. These are
Mm,
all very specific. That's why I hate aspects of the anti vax movement, because
mhm,
the pushback against vaccines has been so extraordinary and so successful that we now have a measles outbreak. I mean, an honest
mhm.
to God measles outbreak in Texas in this community that has not been vaccinated.
Yeah, it was that in West Texas, and it was particularly among a Mennonite population there. And I did some research because I didn't really know much about the Mennonite religion, and I was wondering if there was something in their doctrine that advises against vaccines, and there's not. This was clearly a decision by the community to just not get vaccinated. And when you the other thing to remember about measles is herd immunity. If 95% of people have the vaccine for measles, you're going to protect even those that aren't vaccinated. But when that number dips below 95, those that aren't vaccinated, those who aren't yet vaccinated. So you talk about an infant who's 6 months old, they're going to be at risk to measles when the herd immunity drops below 95%. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And measles has a really high fatality rate, 15.2% for those under 5%, and even those under 5 years old. And even survivors, 30% end up with long-term brain inflammation, encephalitis, deafness, blindness. It's really tragic. And I sent the chart to your producers. I wanted to see if we could get it up on screen here at some point, just to compare, like you were saying, across different infectious diseases that we've been talking about in the news, just to sort of give you an idea of how much more infectious and contagious measles is.
Did we
But
get
it's
that? Did you get it, Tony, or not? Maybe we don't have it, or do you don't have
It
it? Let
wasn't
me.
sent to me.
I'll try to.
Sorry.
But yeah, that's the problem. We have different people working. I'm going to send it
oh,
to you now, maybe, and you'll be able to, if I can find it. Give me just 20 seconds. This is the live show as we. I don't see it either. It might have been sent to Kim.
oh yeah. Do you want me to? Let
Uh,
me see if I can resend it to you right now.
yeah, but I also have. What did I give you, Tony? I gave you something on. What did I give you? I gave you something also related to vaccines, I believe. I did want to ask you, and it's worth noting. We're getting some feedback in the chat. Tuberculosis outbreaks. Apparently, I mean, there has been. Oh, and here we got. Before I get to tuberculosis, I got this in after hours commenting. A lot of people watch our show in delay, and so they'll leave comments, and we go through and we really do read everybody's comments, and that's just a note to all of our viewers and listeners. But this is on YouTube when I say the comments. Harry, my hero, says some vaccines are helpful and necessary, but it is insane to require a newborn to get 61 shots in the first months. Now, I did a little research, and I didn't see 61 shots for any newborn. So that is a total load of shit right away.
You're right.
Now, you can tell me, though, that's typically done, right? People see that and go, yeah, wow, that doesn't make any sense. Man, the medical, like, no one really does the follow-up to see how completely full of BS that information is. Speak to the vaccine schedule. I don't want to get into a whole vax thing, but then this is how we end up with a TB outbreak, a measles outbreak, because I think the information is getting all scrambled.
Yeah, and actually, Mark, I just sent you that chart.
Yes,
See
I'm
if you
going to
can
send
bring
it
it
on
up.
to, I'll send it on to Tony. Good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're 100% right. It's not 61 shots over the course of, a few months. And I think that's exactly the kind of, misinformation that gets sent on a tweet and everybody jumps on, like you said, without doing any of their own research. And so, a lot of these things are spread out over the first couple years of a child's life. And even, to take the measles one as an example, the first shot at 12 to 15 months provides almost 97% protection. And that second one just brings you to 99. So, even just one can do so much to provide almost lifetime immunization against a very deadly virus. And, a lot of people have said, well, I've had my two when I was a kid. Do I need a third? And so it's a really good question, but only less than 1% of people ever need a third measles shot. And that's people who are immune compromised, people suffering from cancer or on chemo. If they want to check their titers, you ask your doctor to check your IgG, your immunoglobulin G level for measles, and that'll give you a sense of whether you're still protected. But for most people, 99%, two shots are good.
This brings up a really important question then, because with the measles outbreak, and we are going to put the chart up, there it is. Measles, influenza, tuberculosis, COVID-19, the Omicron.
Yep.
Take us through this chart, but I want to get to, okay, there's an outbreak of measles, fewer and fewer people are getting vaccinated, et cetera. How vulnerable am I if I had that measles vaccine back when I was a kid?
Right. So for most people, probably 99% of people, if you've had your two shots, this is not a threat to you. But if you just to compare across the different diseases we've been talking about that are in the news lately. So I created this chart just to show you how contagious measles is. So in a room of 10 people who are not vaccinated, kids, adults, you put somebody with measles, active measles in there, 10 out of 10 are going to get it. Because
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
it's called the R naught, and that's the reproductive um factor that we use to compare how infectious diseases are. And that's because the measles virus stays in the air so much longer than, say, COVID or flu. And so that's why it's so contagious. So 10 out of 10 are going to get it. But then if you look, for influenza, it's less than two. For tuberculosis, it's also less than two, because the COVID virus and, sorry, the flu virus, the tuberculosis bacteria, the COVID virus, they are airborne, but they're a little bit heavier, and so they won't stay in the air as long. They'll drop to the ground. But because measles is technically lighter, stays airborne for a longer period of time, even after somebody has left the room. And it just shows you how much more contagious these are, and that's why that 95% herd immunity is so important, especially for measles.
And so, as the bird flu emerges, we need to likely vaccinate against it. There would be a vaccine against contracting bird flu. Where does bird flu, of course, this is impossible for you to answer this question, probably because it has yet to manifest, I think, in any kind of way that can really be
Yeah.
studied in the human population, but maybe you can still take a shot at it. How contagious, in that chart of contagions and contagiousness, how contagious is the bird flu potentially?
Right. So we don't, as of now, have any evidence that there's been human to human spread, right? That's like the key point to make. All of the infections that we know in humans from bird flu are from, wild birds or people working in livestock. And that's why in our ER, we started screening people with anybody with flu-like symptoms. One question: do you work in livestock? Just to make sure those individuals don't get past the safety net of the ER. But to answer your question again, what was concerning in this one case of somebody who got bird flu in Louisiana that got very sick was that during the course of this patient's illness, the virus mutated within him, because as you're sick, the virus is replicating. That's what's causing your symptoms. And the mutations that researchers saw in this particular patient showed that the virus had adapted to infect the upper airways of humans. That to me is really scary. And as I mentioned to you before, what we don't want is for a livestock worker to have regular seasonal flu because they didn't get vaccinated, contract bird flu from their job. The two viruses intermingle within that person, in that patient, while they're sick, and create a bird flu that's then human to human
Wow.
transmissible.
Wow.
That's
I mean,
what we don't want.
yeah, that sounds like
And
a Stephen King novel kind of horror. Yeah. Um,
no, I that would be literally patient zero right there. And as I mentioned to you last or 2 weeks ago, we have vaccines stockpiled, particularly for avian flu, because we were worried about this happening in the future. And as I mentioned to you, I think it would be such a great public health gesture to, try to vaccinate as many livestock workers as possible, just to protect them and stop the virus in its track, keep it from becoming human to human.
seems like such an easy plan to implement, such a simple plan. I don't understand why that isn't already happening. When you deal in so many different environments, I mean, in workspace, you take all kinds of other precautions. I mean, there's special precautions that
Right.
are prescribed, if I can use the word, for that.
Mhm.
It's not always medical, but prescribed for those workers. That makes total sense. Take me back to the breakout of TB. I think it's in Oklahoma where it's happening.
Yeah, so right now there's about 67 patients that they're tracking with active TB and 79 with latent TB. So the difference is active TB, you were infected and you have the disease. Latent tuberculosis, you were infected, but you don't actually have the disease. You're not showing any symptoms. The treatment for TB, it's because it's a bacteria, there's 4 antibiotics. It's a 6 month regimen of antibiotics. It's not a walk in the park at all. Fortunately, in this case, in Kansas right now, in Kansas City, Kansas, there's no cases of MDR TB, multi-drug resistant TB. That's what we don't want. And actually, a couple years ago in Kansas, they did have an outbreak of MDR TB. So again, to go back to your earlier question about measles, like how susceptible is the general population there to TB? It's very unlikely. We usually see TB in people that are immune compromised, people who have, HIV, AIDS, other immune suppressing diseases, because TB is an opportunistic infection, meaning that it's only going to take advantage of immune systems that are compromised. So the risk for the general public is low, but for people that live in, close-knit settings, rehab facilities, nursing homes, prisons, even you talk about military barracks. I mean, something like, TB could be an issue. And, the symptoms are cough, coughing up blood, night sweats, unintentional weight loss. It's just shocking to see a TB outbreak in this day and age. I mean, this is this is a scourge of the ancient world, essentially. And the good thing, though, that even though there's this CDC national blackout of sharing of public health information, I've seen that the states are still doing a great job of reporting what's going on. So, kudos to the Kansas State Public Health Authority for keeping us up to date. And also, the American Medical Association continues to put out updates on bird flu, TB, and measles. So it's great to see these public health leaders like stepping up and still talking about what's going on, sharing information in the absence of, the federal government putting out enough information right now.
That is encouraging. I think I said Oklahoma. It's Kansas,
Kansas.
right over the border. Um, and now, lastly, the global cut in funding for healthcare, in funding for so much that has, I think, put us on the cutting edge of so many breakthroughs from a health standpoint. One of the great things I think about technology is the way in which the world has come together. We saw it. And the WHO, I also thought was and we could talk about this, I'm curious. I mean, it was dominated by China without question. And it was full of money and moneyed interests, okay, basically China and the US, okay, we were the other big moneyed interest, and they can dictate policy. But that said, there is a clearinghouse of information, and there is a collaboration worldwide that we saw during the pandemic that I felt was such a great aspect of technologies in this, to use your words, day and age. I wonder if you can speak to changes in that collaborative effort, given the cutback in funding at the WHO, at the CDC, and worldwide, the disposition toward the U.S. because of all of these changes.
Well, two big points to make there. I was a Peace Corps volunteer back in 2003, and President Bush started PEPFAR, which was the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And it was like the largest global health program ever. It was $110 billion that we spent. 25 million lives have been saved with antiretroviral therapy that we provided to developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, South America, and Asia. And when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, we used a lot of that funding to set up HIV testing and treatment clinics around the West Indies islands where I was working. And, it was such an effective program. So many people depend on that for their treatment. PEPFAR was like President Bush's probably one of his greatest achievements that he was able to do. And so, to see that funding cut is just heartbreaking for me personally. And then to answer your question about, global collaboration, when COVID broke out and we didn't know what was going on, it was literally us talking to ER colleagues in Italy who experienced this firsthand, and then again in New York, just to say, across Twitter or just text message, what are you doing to treat COVID patients? What's working? What's not working? And so, with technology, we will still, those of us on the front line will find a way to do what we need to do to share information and help patients. But that was just a great collaborative effort that just sprung up spontaneously. And, hopefully we won't have to do it again, but
No, I mean, but there will be world health challenges. I mean, there will be other pandemics. I mean, it's
sure.
inevitable. There have been through time, and
Yeah.
so the instruments to fight those pandemics have evolved in all of these exciting,
Mhm,
positive ways. And you've talked about this collaborative effort. And so
mhm.
I really am um, a bit anxious about the changes, at
Yeah,
least in this country, but I'm encouraged by what you've just said. I want to, before I let you go, I want to take a couple of questions that have come in, and
sure.
I think you'll appreciate them. Please ask, says D. Elliott, how we can protect ourselves. I'm chuckling because I don't know, protect yourself from what? There's so many
Probably
different threats, but
probably
go ahead.
bird flu.
Yeah, bird flu. Go ahead.
Probably for I mean, yeah, you just the patient that got really sick in Louisiana, there was like a sick duck in their backyard. So any kind of wild ducks, I would just stay away from in general, especially because this new strain, the H5N9, it was on a duck farm in California that they found that new strain. And so, like it's just common sense, like any kind of wild ducks or birds that fall in your yards that appear ill, like just stay away from. If you work in the livestock industry, make sure to ask where you're working, what kind of biosecurity things are in place, how you can protect yourself. Obviously, if you have flu-like symptoms and you work in that industry, you want to get checked out. You want to go to the nearest ER, and so we can test you and just get you on the public health radar, just to make sure we're not any of these patients are not falling through the net. But another big thing is don't drink raw milk. I can't believe I have to continue to say this, but raw milk's not pasteurized. It's not going to you can't be certain that bird flu is not going to be in raw milk at this point, but pasteurized milk, from what we've seen, the high temperature does kill bird flu. Regular milk is safe to drink. But I would say that's probably the big thing. Any kind of like raw dairy products, you got to be careful.
Uh, I have two chickens, says Wes, in my backyard that we let loose. Are they safe? He wants to know.
Yeah, that's a good point, because again, a lot of the wild birds, if they're nesting or they're coming onto your grounds or where you live, and their feces can get into the soil, it can get into the bird feed for your chickens. So I think you have to be careful. May not want to let chickens on your yard run wild, just of what's going on right now, especially in California. We're like on a migratory route for a lot of these wild birds.
The vaccine, says Grimjer, the vaccine protocol has been so effective for decades that we have forgotten the horror of what
Mhm.
it's like to have these diseases spreading through our communities. I suppose you'd agree with that without question. Right, doctor? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people nowadays just don't remember or have relatives that had polio. I think that's where we're starting to lose the plot a little bit.
As many as 13, this is a wild one. I don't know. This will be fun, though. Rich says as many as 13 viruses have been discovered in the permafrost, while the threat of zombie viruses is real. Some scientists say there are still many unknowns about how they could affect humans. These zombie viruses that are in the permafrost, that are being
Mhm.
unleashed, it's not, now this is just me, it's not wrong, right, doctor? I mean, that is a real thing. Yes?
Viruses in the permafrost. Yeah, I mean, a lot of if you look at, you I mean, I'm not an expert in this. I just read a lot. If you think about like astrobiology, a lot of, bacteria and viruses, maybe have come to Earth millennia ago on the backs of asteroids and comets and then get frozen in the permafrost. Yeah, that's true. But then you have to think about what is going to be the vector to actually carry those viruses to the general population if they're just defrosting in the ice. And so, I think the risk is pretty low unless somebody, finds the virus in the permafrost and it figures out how to weaponize it.
That
I mean,
is what
again,
Phineas is saying. Phineas says Putin and China are going to weaponize the permafrost
there we
viruses,
go.
doctor. I'm glad you could come here and get the truth from Phineas.
Yeah. We're getting into we're creating some good ideas for movies here, I think.
Yeah, this is, I'm telling you, this is very Stephen King. I love our conversations. I thank you for being a regular visitor. Uh, Do you have any place if people want to sort of be in touch with you? You can reach us here on the show, and I'll ask the doctor, but you can reach us at the Mark Thompson Show at gmail.com. But you can follow Dr. Michael Daignault. Where can they follow you, doctor?
Yeah, I just use Instagram. It's dr.daignault, dr.daignault, and that's primarily for public health. I post a lot of reels on, latest news. Recently it was, why this flu season is so bad, and then we talked about the LA fires, how the air quality has been affected as well. So happy to take questions on there as well. And on Fox 11, we do a medical roundup every week, and we have an Ask the Doc section. So if anybody's got some burning health or wellness questions, I'm also happy to answer those on air there.
That's in Los Angeles for those who are in LA. I just got last week. I got the flu virus shot, and I got the COVID shot. And when I was talking to a nurse, she said, "Wow, that's really late to get it." And then I said, "Yeah, I know. I just thought it's a bad season." She said, "Yeah, but that's really late to get it. You got it really late." So that made me think like maybe it's too late to get it. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is that it's been mentioned in our chat. Is it now really just too late to get the vaccines that I got, or is it still not such a bad idea?
No, for flu, I still think it's a good idea. I mean, we are still at this peak in the country, but I looked at the LA wastewater data recently for flu, and we seem to have peaked a little bit in LA. But just remember, just because the peak is coming down, there's still a lot of infections that are going to happen on the downslope. And then you also have to remember, primarily what we've seen, 92% of the serotyping of the flu virus that's been done is flu A, and so flu B typically happens now through the spring. And so it's still really important. And one thing I want to mention, looking at the Southern Hemisphere data from South America, Australia, and New Zealand, the protection against severe illness usually is around 40% with the flu vaccine. This year it's dipped to about 35, just because sometimes when they choose the vaccine strains, it's not 100% match. But you have to remember that that 35% protection against severe illness and hospitalization is still, that's not insignificant at all.
Sure.
And
Sure.
the flu could change. The current prevalent strain could change over the next few months, and so the vaccine could still protect you, especially if it switches over to flu B, which it typically does.
Wow. Great stuff in this visit. Thank you, Dr. Michael Daignault. I look forward to our next visit.
Thank you for having me again. Yeah, let's do it again.
Of course, for sure. Dr. D, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.